In this video, we're going to take a look at how to create patrol missions. Patrol missions are basically missions where you create an area and a certain type of target to be looking for in that area, and units will automatically explore that area as well as engage that type of targets. So for example, let's go ahead and create a combat air patrol around our little carrier group here. First thing I'm going to do is define an area. There's a couple different ways we can do this. We can first go ahead and create individual points. I'll go ahead and press Control Insert, create a total of 4 points. Select those points, which now gives us the ability to define this area here, or if we choose, we can do Control right-click and then go ahead and define area rectangle or define area as a circle. So let's say, for example, I want to define an area around our carrier group like this. Simply click and drag and let go. Now, because this is going to be combat air patrol over the carrier, we want to make it so that this area can follow the carrier. So what I'm going to do is go up to Mission Ref Points. I'm going to scroll down into Make Rotating Bearing. So now if I click on my carrier group, you'll notice each one of these points of my area are automatically going to follow this particular aircraft as it goes along. Now for this particular mission, I want to design it so that the carrier group here is going to have aircraft constantly flying in a circle around it, and this larger region is simply going to be the region in which the different aircraft are going to be engaged. Keep in mind, as we'll see in a minute, there are different types of these types of patrols depending on what you're trying to do. I'm going to use the complex example here first. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to deselect those points, and I'm going to go ahead and create an area around our carriers that our aircraft are going to be constantly circulating around during the duration of the mission. So now I'm going to go ahead and create the mission itself. I'll click on Editor, or I should say Mission Ref Points, Add New Mission. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and call this Cap. We'll change the class to Patrol. Now notice under Patrol you have multiple options, ranging from air-to-air warfare to anti-surface warfare, including both naval, ground, and mixed, ASW, Sea Patrol, as well as Sea Control missions. Sea Control missions are simply missions where they're going to be doing all the different ASW as well as ASUW in a limited area. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and say AAW and press the OK key. Okay, now that we've defined that, you'll notice that that little area that I created earlier has shown itself in red. By the way, if this is not visible, go to Map Settings, go ahead and come down to Mission Area, and you can go ahead and select it. If I were to disable this, the area is still there. We just can't visibly see it on the map, making it more difficult to go ahead and predict what you're trying to do here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to change this mode. Instead of doing this as an area, I'm going to change its movement style to be a repeatable loop. Now the aircraft will actually fly this as a loop around the carrier group constantly. Now you're probably going, well, what about all those points that we made out here? So one of the interesting things about the way this is set up is that you have a patrol area, which is the path the aircraft follow if they're not engaged, and you have a prosecution area, which is going to be the area in which the units are allowed to engage targets. So I'm actually going to select this larger area and deselect all these inner areas, and then add them as the prosecution area. So now visibly, the aircraft are going to be following this pathway here, and they're going to be engaging any targets inside of this region. You do not need to define a prosecution area. It's just basically a housekeeping item that can make it easier to control the position of your units. Next on our particular patrol page here is you have the ability to select a bunch of different options for your mission. First, you have the ability to try to keep a certain number of units on station. Note that if you set this to 0 and click on the 1/3 rule, it will attempt to take 1/3 of the units at any given time and mark them to the station. For example, if I were to grab my F/A-18Fs here and load them all here, I have a total of 12 of these. So if I were to run this mission as is, this particular mission would take 12 divided by 3, which would be 4, and go ahead and launch those and keep them airborne at all time. Keep in mind, if any of these aircraft go ahead and return to base, the other aircraft will automatically be launched as soon as they have the return to base order. Below that option, you have the ability to investigate unknown contacts outside the patrol area. This simply says that you're able to leave this patrol path to investigate a contact. Keep in mind, the size of this will be limited by your prosecution area. Underneath here, you have the investigate unknown contacts within weapon range. That's the same concept. However, instead of worrying about the prosecution zone, we're also going to be interested in places where we can actually engage our targets. So that gives us an even wider range in which to operate. Below here, we have the ability to define whether active emissions should only include patrol and prosecution areas. If you click this one on, but do not activate active emissions under the mission doctrine on the MCON page, it will not make a difference as far as this goes. The nice advantage to this is, let's say we launch a carrier aircraft in AWACS plane and we want it to fly away from the carrier group before starting emitting. This is an excellent way to actually select that. But if we wanted the AWACS plane to start emitting as soon as it gets airborne, we want to make sure this checkbox is off or that our area does include where we're actually operating. Below this, we have the different types of movement styles. And again, we took a look at these a moment ago. We can do random within an area, in which case you're going to fly within the area itself randomly, or you can find it as a repeatable loop, in which case the aircraft will follow this path constantly. Keep in mind, you can have a patrol area and prosecution area be the same item by unchecking these two boxes and not creating a prosecution area. Below this, we have the ability to define our flight size, or we can say a 2 aircraft, we can do 4 aircraft, 6, any size, we can even do single aircraft. Keep in mind with the 1/3 rule selected here, you're only going to have 1/3 of the total aircraft in these little single aircraft groups. So for another thing you want to watch out for too is, let's say I select 2 sections. If I had for some reason 3 FA-18s, this would not launch unless this checkbox down here saying enforced flight size is not checked. So in the event that we had such as a loss, but we have an available airplane, it will launch that aircraft anyway. Down here, we also have the ability to enable air-to-air refueling, which is going to be covered in a later video. We also have the configuration page for the air-to-air refueling, which we'll also take a look at as well. Coming down below, we have the ability to select how many aircraft are required to trigger a mission. So if we want to launch all the aircraft, we need to make sure this is completely available. In this case, if I selected this, all 12 of these aircraft would have to be ready before the mission is even triggered. You have to be a little bit careful with this. Next thing we have is the ability to decide how many aircraft investigate an unknown contact. In this case, we can do 1. We can also define how many aircraft engage hostile contacts. The danger here is of course, if you have many aircraft on combat air patrol, and you have everybody attacking the same unit, you're going to run into a situation where, for example, they're attacking here, and another enemy unit approaches from this other direction here. Down below this, we can go ahead and define, and wingman can investigate and engage separate contacts. This simply says that the wingman can break off from the group to go ahead and engage something separately. And then at the bottom, of course, we have the ability to engage flight size, depending on which we're trying to achieve. On the right-hand side, we can go ahead and define the different properties of our particular mission here. We can define what throttle we should be using for transiting to the zone, what throttle we should be using when we're in the zone, what throttle we should be using as far as attacking. Notice this is set as unspecified. The aircraft will usually go to full power afterburner. We can define the transit altitude, the station altitude, and the attack altitude and the attack distance. The attack distance is simply the distance that the aircraft will try to remain before they engage in any sort of air-to-air warfare in this particular case. Our flight plan gives us the ability to define the flight plan, and of course we have continuous coverage, but this is covered in a slightly different area as well. Once we're happy with the mission, we can actually deactivate the mission by coming over here and pressing inactive, and we can even set an activation time as well as a deactivation time. Notice for this particular mission, it has a separate Doctrine, MCON, and WRA status. For example, let's say that we wanted to make it so that our AMRAAMs are only going to be fired in pairs. We could come up here and say weapons per salvo. We could go ahead and say 2. In the event that we wanted them to always use 2 of these every time they found a particular type of target. WRA and MCON is covered in a different video. So once this has simply been established, I'm going to go ahead and close the menu. And now if I were to look at the actual ship itself, and I were to go to this F-18Fs, I will notice that they are now put on this cap mission. If I want to add another unit to the cap mission, I simply would select it, assign a mission, and then hit cap as well. Now, after our mission has been launched, we can see that the group of F-18s is flown out to the first edge of its particular patrol zone, is now flying in a little pattern around the base itself, kind of keeping an eye on things completely within its prosecution zone as well. This is it as far as patrol missions goes. Keep in mind the type of patrol mission that you're operating with must match what is going on. So in the case that we were doing this as a seed mission, we need to define it as a seed mission so that the particular type of doctrine is automatically selected.